A single brushstroke may have changed the destiny of an empire. Was it 4 or 14? In 1722, the death of Emperor Kangxi sparked one of the most shocking succession scandals in Chinese history. And in the shadows of the Forbidden City, a quiet prince named Yongzheng seized the throne. But was he the rightful heir or a usurper?
Imagine a throne that could change the destiny of an empire. Imagine an emperor who ruled longer than almost any other in Chinese history, 61 years on the dragon throne. This was the Kangxi Emperor, one of the greatest rulers of the Qing Dynasty. His reign brought peace after decades of war, stability to a vast and diverse empire, and prosperity to millions. But with such a long and powerful reign came one haunting question. Who would inherit the throne after him? Now, succession in imperial China wasn't just about bloodline. It was about power, politics, and survival. In a court filled with ambitious princes, cunning officials, and watchful empresses, the choice of the next emperor could spark loyalty or ignite deadly rivalries. And that's exactly what happened at the end of Kangxi's reign. Officially, there was no doubt who should have inherited the throne. The crown prince, Yongzheng, Kangxi's second son, had been carefully chosen, groomed, and honored for decades. By tradition, he was the man destined to rule after his father. Yet history tells a very different story. Because when Kangxi passed away in 1722, it wasn't Yongzheng who took the throne. It was another prince, his fourth son, Yongzheng, who became Emperor Yongzheng. But how did this happen? How could a carefully prepared crown prince lose everything, while a quieter, more reserved brother rose to power? Was it truly Kangxi's final will, or was it a case of deception and manipulation inside the walls of the Forbidden City? This mystery has baffled historians for centuries. Some say the will was tampered with, that the words 14th Prince were altered to read 4th Prince. Others argue that Kangxi saw in Yongzheng the qualities of a true ruler: discipline, caution, and the ability to manage an empire without being consumed by ambition. The truth may never be fully known, but the drama surrounding this succession became one of the greatest political intrigues in Chinese history. Picture the scene: the Forbidden City, early 18th century. Behind its towering red walls and golden roofs, princes whispered in secret, factions clashed, and alliances shifted like shadows in candlelight. Every smile could hide a dagger. Every gift, every gesture could mean life or death. And at the heart of it all was the throne, the most coveted seat in the empire. When we look at history, it's easy to think succession is a matter of destiny, that emperors are chosen by heaven alone. But here's the reality. Power is rarely passed peacefully. Behind every transfer of the throne, there are calculations, betrayals, and often tragedies. The Kangxi succession was no different. In fact, it was a storm of politics and human ambition unlike anything the Qing Dynasty had ever seen. And here's a question for you. If you were in Kangxi's place, an emperor with dozens of sons, each with their own strengths, flaws, and powerful backers, how would you choose your successor? Do you follow tradition and honor the crown prince no matter his mistakes? Or do you risk breaking the system to give the throne to someone you believe is more capable, even if it plunges the royal family into chaos? This is the heart of our story. Not just who wore the crown, but why. A story of fathers and sons, of loyalty and betrayal, of ambition that could shape the fate of an empire. And as we peel back the layers of this succession crisis, we'll uncover not just the rise of Yongzheng, but the high-stakes drama that made this one of the most shocking power struggles in history. So, let's step inside the Forbidden City, into the twilight of the Kangxi Emperor's reign, and uncover the web of intrigue that determined who would rule next. Let's step back into the late 1600s, into the grandeur of the Qing Dynasty, where one man's rule would stretch across 6 decades. The Kangxi Emperor, arguably one of China's greatest monarchs, sat on the throne for 61 years, from 1661 to 1722. To give you perspective, that's longer than the reign of Queen Elizabeth II of England, and nearly as long as Louis XIV, the famous Sun King of France. Kangxi wasn't just an emperor. He was the steady heartbeat of a dynasty, guiding his empire through wars, reforms, and cultural achievements. Now, imagine the weight of ruling for that long. Kangxi came to power as a child, just 7 years old, and by the time he grew into a seasoned ruler, he had expanded the empire, stabilized its borders, and earned the respect of millions. But with such longevity comes a pressing question. What happens after him? Who could possibly take the reins of an empire this vast and powerful? Succession in imperial China was no small matter. A weak heir could mean chaos, rebellion, even the collapse of a dynasty. Kangxi knew this well, and he wanted to prevent the power struggles that so often tore royal families apart. So, in a bold move that broke centuries of tradition, he named his successor early. Not in his later years, not when death loomed near, but while he was still strong and capable. And the one he chose was his second son, Yongzheng. This decision shocked the court. Normally, emperors delayed naming their heir until much later, keeping everyone guessing to maintain balance among the princes. But Kangxi thought differently. He believed that by declaring a crown prince young, he could ensure stability, protect the dynasty, and give his chosen son time to prepare for the immense responsibility of ruling. It was a radical choice, but one that came from both a father's affection and an emperor's foresight. Yongzheng wasn't just any child. From a young age, he was groomed to be the future emperor. He received the finest tutors, studied philosophy, history, and the classics, and was given special privileges that marked him as different from his brothers. The court bowed to him as the heir apparent. Officials aligned themselves with him, and the people of the empire expected that one day he would wear the dragon robe. But here's where the story becomes truly fascinating. Kangxi didn't just want a son who could read books or memorize Confucian texts. He wanted a ruler who embodied 3 core values: loyalty, administrative skill, and moral conduct. To Kangxi, these weren't abstract virtues. They were survival tools. Loyalty meant staying true to the empire above personal gain. Administrative skill meant the ability to govern millions of subjects spread across vast lands. And moral conduct, perhaps the most difficult of all, meant ruling with integrity, resisting temptation, and upholding justice in a court full of intrigue. Ask yourself, if you were an emperor with dozens of sons, each with their own ambitions and flaws, how would you decide who deserved the throne? Would you pick the eldest, simply because of tradition? Or would you look deeper, searching for the qualities that would preserve your empire long after you were gone? Kangxi chose the latter. He wanted to break free from the rigid expectations of birth order, and instead, he placed his hopes in the son he believed could uphold the dynasty's greatness. But making that choice came at a cost. By elevating Yongzheng so early, Kangxi painted a target on his son's back. The other princes, ambitious and clever, began watching closely. Officials whispered in corridors, some eager to curry favor with the crown prince, others biding their time for the possibility of his downfall. The palace became a silent battlefield, where every smile hid suspicion, and every mistake Yongzheng made could become a weapon against him. Kangxi, though, remained firm in his decision. He loved his son, but more importantly, he believed that early preparation would mold him into a capable ruler. In his mind, this was the best way to protect the dynasty's future. And to be fair, on the surface, Yongzheng seemed to have it all: status, education, and the emperor's blessing. Yet history teaches us a cruel lesson. Preparation doesn't guarantee success. While Kangxi's reign was marked by brilliance and stability, the seeds of future conflict were already being sown in the shadows of the Forbidden City. By naming Yongzheng crown prince so early, Kangxi may have hoped to secure peace, but instead, he set in motion one of the most dramatic succession crises in Chinese history. And that's where our story turns. Because even with all his advantages, Yinreng's path to the throne would be anything but smooth. His story would soon unravel into scandal, betrayal, and bitter disappointment, not just for him, but for his father, the emperor who believed so deeply in him. So, as we move forward, keep this in mind. Kangxi valued loyalty, skill, and morality above all else. He believed he had chosen wisely. But what happens when the heir you prepare your whole life for begins to stumble? What happens when the weight of expectation crushes the very person you've raised to rule? That, my friends, is the tragedy at the heart of Kangxi's succession drama, and it sets the stage for the shocking twists yet to come. When we last left off, the crown prince, Yinreng, had the world at his feet. Handpicked by the Kangxi emperor himself, he was educated by the greatest scholars, trained in statecraft, and given authority in court affairs. Imagine growing up knowing that one day, the empire, stretching from the icy steppes of Mongolia to the bustling ports of the south, would all be yours. Every bow, every lesson, every word spoken in the palace reinforced a single truth. You are destined to be emperor. And for a while, Yinreng seemed to rise to the occasion. He was articulate, intelligent, and had the emperor's trust. Kangxi even allowed him to oversee certain matters of state, giving him a taste of what ruling an empire would be like. To the outside world, it looked like a smooth and seamless succession was just around the corner. The dynasty appeared secure. But here's the danger of power handed too early. It can corrupt before responsibility truly matures. Rumors began to swirl in the court. At first, they were whispers, too faint to challenge the emperor's decision. But over time, they grew louder and harder to ignore. Officials began to murmur that the crown prince was arrogant, quick to anger, and dismissive of those around him. Instead of embodying the Confucian ideals of humility and virtue, Yinreng indulged in extravagance. He spent lavishly, surrounded himself with flatterers, and sought pleasure more than discipline. Think about this for a moment. The heir to one of the most powerful thrones on earth was supposed to be the model of restraint, the embodiment of moral authority. Instead, stories of his misconduct spread like wildfire. Gambling, corruption, even disturbing allegations of cruelty and excess. For the empire's elite, it raised a terrifying question. What happens if this man becomes emperor? Kangxi, at first, was patient. He had invested so much in Yinreng's future. After all, this was not just a political choice. It was a father's hope. But as emperor, Kangxi also had a duty to the empire, and soon his patience began to crack. The first major blow came when Yinreng's arrogance and reckless behavior became impossible to ignore. Kangxi made the shocking decision to depose him as crown prince. The entire court trembled. Removing an heir was unprecedented, destabilizing, and dangerous. It signaled weakness at the very heart of the dynasty. Rival princes, who had been waiting in the shadows, suddenly saw opportunity. The whispers of succession turned into a storm of ambition. But here's the twist. Kangxi couldn't let go completely. After some time, perhaps moved by fatherly love, perhaps hoping his son would change, Kangxi reinstated Yinreng as crown prince. It was a second chance, a chance very few heirs in history ever receive. Yet history repeated itself. Instead of learning from his mistakes, Yinreng fell back into the same patterns: indulgence, arrogance, and reckless decisions. It was as though the weight of expectation had crushed his sense of responsibility. Once again, scandal after scandal reached the emperor's ears, and Kangxi had no choice. Yinreng was deposed for the second time. Can you imagine the turmoil this created in the palace? Think of the empire's officials, waking up each day uncertain of who would one day rule them. Think of the princes, circling like wolves, watching their brother stumble. Every failure of Yinreng wasn't just his downfall. It was the destabilization of the empire itself. Succession, which Kangxi had hoped to secure by appointing Yinreng early, was now in complete disarray. Instead of unity, the decision had sparked division. Instead of stability, it had sown chaos. And now, the throne, the very heart of Qing rule, was left vulnerable. It's easy to criticize Yinreng from a distance, to label him arrogant or reckless. But let's pause for a moment. Imagine being raised since childhood with the certainty that you would one day be emperor. Every official bows to you. Every word you speak is treated as law. Wouldn't that level of power, given so young, be intoxicating? Could any of us, without wisdom and discipline, truly resist the temptation? Still, excuses could not save the dynasty. Yinreng's rise and fall revealed a painful truth. Being groomed for power does not guarantee you are ready for it. In fact, sometimes it does the opposite. It blinds you to your flaws. And so, the great dream Kangxi had, of a smooth succession, of a son prepared to carry his legacy, collapsed before his very eyes. With Yinreng disgraced, the throne once again stood open. And when the throne is open, ambition floods in. Because now, every prince saw a chance. The 8th prince, the 9th, the 14th, all began maneuvering, each with their own allies, their own vision of the future. And in the shadows, one quiet brother, Prince Yongzheng, watched, waited, and prepared. The fall of the crown prince wasn't just the tragedy of a father and son. It was the spark that ignited one of the fiercest succession struggles in Chinese history. With the crown prince, Yinreng, disgraced and deposed not once but twice, the throne of China suddenly stood wide open. And when the most powerful seat in Asia is vacant, ambition comes rushing in like a flood. The Forbidden City, once unified under Kangxi's rule, now became a stage for one of the most intense power struggles in Qing history. A struggle not fought with armies on the battlefield, but with whispers in corridors, alliances in the shadows, and strategies sharper than any sword. The Kangxi emperor had more than 20 sons who survived into adulthood, but only a handful truly had the political weight and personal charisma to make a claim for the throne. And with Yinreng gone, each of these princes began to step forward, building their own networks of supporters within the palace and the government. Let's take a closer look at the key players. First, there was Yinsi, the 8th prince. Among his brothers, Yinsi was admired for his intelligence, charm, and ability to win friends in high places. Many officials at court saw him as the natural choice to succeed Kangxi. He was articulate, he had a commanding presence, and he knew how to gather loyalty. But there was a problem. Kangxi, wise and experienced, looked at Yinsi and saw something dangerous, ambition that burned a little too brightly. To Kangxi, Yinsi wasn't just capable, he was calculating, perhaps even ruthless. And in an emperor's eyes, an heir who desires power too much is often the one who can never be trusted. Then we have Yintang, the 9th prince, and his younger brother, Yinti, the 14th prince. Together, they formed a powerful faction of their own. Yintang was clever, strategic, and good at weaving connections, while Yinti built his reputation through military command. Yinti was the kind of prince who could rally soldiers to his side, a dangerous advantage in a dynasty where armies could make or break emperors. For those who wanted a leader strong enough to keep the empire safe from external threats, Yinti looked like a promising candidate. And yet, in the background, there was another figure. Yongzheng, the 4th prince. Unlike his brothers, Yongzheng didn't build loud alliances or flaunt his ambitions. Instead, he kept a low profile. He worked quietly in administration, showing himself to be diligent, disciplined, and deeply cautious. He wasn't the type to host extravagant banquets or gather huge crowds of supporters. Instead, he won respect by not overreaching. To some, he seemed too reserved, too invisible to be a serious contender. But as we'll later see, sometimes the quietest player at the table is the one holding the strongest hand. So here's the picture. The imperial court divided into camps. Yinsi, with his charm and political reach, gathered many officials to his side. Yintang and Yinti formed their own faction, relying on both political maneuvering and military strength. Yongzheng stayed in the middle, outwardly avoiding conflict, but carefully observing every move. Each faction whispered promises of loyalty, plotted strategies, and waited for any sign of Kangxi's final decision. This wasn't just a family disagreement. It was a political chess game that involved the future of the entire dynasty. Officials, generals, and scholars aligned themselves with different princes, hedging their bets on who might one day rule. Imagine being a minister at that time. Every conversation, every alliance you made could secure your family's future, or condemn you as a traitor if you picked the wrong side. And here's the fascinating part. Kangxi himself watched all of this unfold. He saw the ambition of Yinsi, the strength of Yinti, the calculations of Yintang, and the quiet restraint of Yongzheng. But instead of settling the matter once and for all, he allowed the competition to play out, perhaps as a way to test his sons, perhaps because he himself remained undecided. Think about the atmosphere this created. The Forbidden City was no longer just the seat of power. It became a pressure cooker. Every gesture, every word could shift the balance of power. Was a smile from the emperor a signal of favor? Was a minor appointment to a government post actually a sign of endorsement? No one knew for sure, and so the guessing game consumed everyone. This factional struggle wasn't only about brothers competing for a throne. It was about how ambition, rivalry, and loyalty collided within the most powerful family in China. It's a story that reminds us of something timeless. Whenever there is power, there is struggle. And sometimes, the most dangerous battles are not fought with armies in open fields, but with whispers in palace halls. And while the louder voices clashed, while Yinsi charmed and Yint. Now, let's turn our attention to the man history remembers as Emperor Yongzheng, the fourth prince, Yongzheng. While his brothers fought loudly for the throne, Yongzheng chose a very different path. He wasn't the most charming like Yinsi, the eighth prince. He didn't command armies like Yinti, the 14th. He didn't weave elaborate webs of political intrigue like Yintang, the 9th. Instead, he mastered a far more subtle and dangerous art, the art of patience. In a world where ambition often betrayed itself in flashy displays of loyalty or aggressive maneuvering, Yongzheng decided to stay in the shadows. He didn't throw grand banquets to impress officials. He didn't make grand promises of wealth or promotion. Instead, he built his reputation piece by piece, like a careful craftsman carving jade, quietly, methodically, without ever appearing desperate for recognition. So how did he do it? Let's break down his strategy. First, Yongzheng understood the value of competence. While many of his brothers wasted time on power plays, he dedicated himself to administrative work. He earned a reputation for being diligent, detail-oriented, and efficient. Whenever the emperor assigned him a task, whether it was overseeing a region, handling tax matters, or managing palace rituals, Yongzheng delivered. He didn't just meet expectations, he exceeded them. Officials who worked with him found him dependable, someone who solved problems without creating new ones. Now, think about this in the context of an aging emperor. Kangxi had ruled for over 60 years. He had seen countless officials rise and fall. He had witnessed his own crown prince fail spectacularly. What would impress such an experienced ruler? Not empty flattery, not loud ambition, but quiet competence. Kangxi didn't need another schemer at his side. He needed someone who could keep the empire running smoothly after him. And Yongzheng's track record spoke louder than any political speech ever could. Second, Yongzheng managed his relationship with his father with extraordinary care. He stayed close enough to Kangxi to show loyalty, but never so close that he seemed manipulative. He offered advice when asked, carried out assignments faithfully, and never pushed himself forward as the obvious successor. In fact, part of his genius was in not looking like he wanted the throne. Because here's the paradox of imperial succession. The more you openly desire it, the less likely you are to get it. Kangxi distrusted ambition. He saw it clearly in Yinsi, who charmed officials but seemed too hungry for power. He saw it in Yintang and Yinti, whose political and military maneuvers made them look more like challengers than heirs. But Yongzheng played the opposite game. He positioned himself as the son who wanted nothing more than to serve his father, to support the empire, and to avoid the dangerous storms of palace rivalry. That doesn't mean he wasn't ambitious. Oh, he was. Make no mistake. But his ambition was wrapped in restraint, hidden under layers of discipline. He understood that the path to power wasn't through loud declarations, but through earning trust so deeply that when the time came, he seemed like the natural choice. Third, Yongzheng refused to tie himself too closely to any faction. This may have been his most brilliant move. The court was divided into camps, the supporters of Yinsi, the followers of Yintang and Yinti, and countless smaller groups of officials hedging their bets. Aligning with one side meant gaining allies, yes, but it also meant making enemies. And in the politics of the Forbidden City, enemies were often deadlier than friends were helpful. So Yongzheng walked a careful line. He didn't openly oppose his brothers, but he also didn't embrace their causes. He appeared neutral, above the fray, a figure who could work with anyone. This neutrality gave him flexibility. No one could accuse him of plotting rebellions or scheming for control of the army. No one could say he had promised titles or wealth in exchange for loyalty. And because he avoided scandal, he remained untouchable when others stumbled. Now pause and think about this. In today's world, we often think of leadership as loud, charismatic, and bold. But history shows us another side. Sometimes the most effective leaders are the ones who bide their time, who let others burn themselves out fighting while they quietly build the foundation of their authority. Yongzheng was playing a long game, and he played it better than anyone else in the Qing court. Here's another layer to consider. Yongzheng wasn't just avoiding conflict. He was also learning from it. Watching Yinreng's arrogance destroy him, watching Yinsi's overreach lose Kangxi's trust, watching Yintang and Yinti gamble their futures on military and political alliances, Yongzheng absorbed every lesson. He understood what not to do. And sometimes, knowing what not to do is the most powerful skill of all. But here's the real genius of Yongzheng's calculated strategy. By staying quiet, by avoiding factions, by excelling in administration, he created a paradoxical image. He looked like the one brother who didn't want the throne, and that made him, in Kangxi's eyes, the safest choice to hold it. Let's bring this closer to home. Think about the workplace. Maybe you've seen someone who is always loud about their achievements, always chasing credit, always elbowing their way to the front. And then there's another person, quieter, who just keeps doing good work, earning trust, never needing to announce themselves. Who would you rather put in charge? The one constantly chasing recognition, or the one who proves reliability day after day? Kangxi was no different. He had been emperor too long to be fooled by ambition disguised as loyalty. He wanted someone steady, someone disciplined. And so, while his brothers fought openly, Yongzheng kept carving out his image as the dutiful son, the competent administrator, the man who could be trusted with power precisely because he didn't seem to crave it. Of course, this doesn't mean Yongzheng was without controversy. Some later historians and critics argued that his restraint was an act, that his humility was a mask hiding sharp ambition. And perhaps it was. But whether genuine or calculated, it worked. Yongzheng survived the storms that toppled his brothers. He avoided the traps of arrogance, the stains of scandal, and the dangers of overreach. In the end, when Kangxi finally passed away, the throne didn't go to the charming 8th Prince, the military 14th, or the scheming 9th. It went to the 4th, the quiet one, the cautious one, the man who played the long game and won. And that raises a timeless question. Is true leadership about shouting the loudest, or about waiting patiently, proving yourself quietly, and stepping in when the moment is right? Yongzheng's calculated strategy reminds us that sometimes the greatest power move is not to appear powerful at all. The year was 1722. After more than 60 years on the throne, the great Kangxi Emperor, one of China's longest reigning monarchs, finally passed away. His death was the end of an era, but it also triggered the question that had haunted the Qing court for decades. Who would succeed him? When the imperial will was read, the answer stunned the empire. The throne was not going to the ambitious 8th Prince, not to the military 14th Prince, not even to the disgraced but once favored Crown Prince Yongzheng. No, it was Yongzheng, the quiet 4th Prince, who was named heir. He would become the Yongzheng Emperor. On paper, it seemed clear enough. The will was the emperor's final word, the sacred decree that no one could challenge. But almost immediately, whispers began to spread. Something about the document didn't sit right with everyone, and soon, suspicion turned into one of the greatest controversies in Chinese imperial history. Here's the heart of the mystery. Some claimed that the original will had not said the 4th Prince at all. Instead, it might have read the 14th Prince. The difference in Chinese characters between 4 and 14 is small, just a single brushstroke. Could that tiny stroke have been altered after Kangxi's death? Could a forgery have placed Yongzheng on the throne? This rumor spread like wildfire. Supporters of the 14th Prince argued that he had been the true heir, favored by Kangxi for his military skill and strong leadership. They pointed out that Kangxi had entrusted Yinti with important campaigns and seemed to place great confidence in him. To them, it seemed far more logical that Kangxi would have chosen Yinti over the cautious Yongzheng. But defenders of Yongzheng countered with their own arguments. They claimed that Kangxi, after decades of ruling, had grown wary of bold and ambitious sons. He didn't want another prince with the arrogance of Yinreng or the political hunger of Yinsi. Instead, they argued, Kangxi deliberately chose Yongzheng because of his steady hand, his administrative discipline, and his ability to govern without letting ambition consume him. In this version of the story, the will was genuine, and Yongzheng's rise was the emperor's carefully considered decision. So, which version is true? Was it forgery? Was it a secret last-minute decision? Or was it exactly what the emperor had intended all along? Historians have debated this for centuries, and even today, there's no definitive answer. But here's where the story becomes even more fascinating. Regardless of whether the will was altered or not, the fact remains. Yongzheng ascended the throne and became Emperor Yongzheng. And once he wore the dragon robe, he wasted no time consolidating his rule. He cracked down on rivals, tightened control over the court, and launched sweeping reforms to strengthen imperial authority. To some, this was proof of his legitimacy. After all, he proved himself capable. To others, it was evidence of guilt, that he was ruling harshly because he feared the shadow of an illegitimate claim. Think about it. How often in history have we seen leaders rise under mysterious circumstances, only to spend their reigns defending their right to power? From medieval kings in Europe to presidents in modern times, the legitimacy of succession has always been a lightning rod for controversy. And for Yongzheng, that question never fully went away. Was he the rightful heir chosen by his father, or a usurper who seized power through deception? Here's something to reflect on. Perhaps both versions of the story carry some truth. Kangxi may have recognized Yongzheng's qualities but hesitated to announce it too boldly. Or perhaps powerful allies in the palace acted swiftly after the emperor's death, making sure Yongzheng was the one to inherit, believing he was the safest choice to preserve stability. In either case, the result was the same. Yongzheng became Yongzheng, and history moved forward. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Sometimes, history isn't shaped by certainty, but by perception. The will may or may not have been altered, but once Yongzheng was enthroned, perception became reality. He was the emperor, and in the Forbidden City where power was absolute, that reality mattered more than the debate. Still, the controversy lingers. Even today, historians, scholars, and storytellers continue to argue over those brushstrokes. Was it 4 or 14? That single line of ink changed the fate of an empire. So let me ask you this. Do you think Yongzheng was a rightful heir chosen for his discipline and loyalty? Or do you believe he stole the throne through clever manipulation? And more importantly, does it even matter if in the end, his reign left such a lasting mark on Chinese history? Because one thing is certain. Whether by destiny, deception, or design, Yongzheng would go on to rule as Yongzheng, one of the most controversial yet transformative emperors of the Qing Dynasty.
When the dust finally settled in 1722, and the echoes of Kangxi's death quieted across the Forbidden City, one man stood as emperor, Yongzheng, now known as Emperor Yongzheng. His rise was clouded in whispers of scandal, suspicions of forged wills, and accusations of betrayal. But whatever the truth behind his succession, the fact remained. He wore the dragon robe, and the empire was his to command. Now here's the fascinating part. Yongzheng's reign, though relatively short at just 13 years, became one of the most decisive and transformative chapters in Qing history. He didn't waste time celebrating or indulging in grandeur. Instead, he rolled up his sleeves and got to work, reshaping the empire with a kind of relentless energy that few expected from this once quiet prince. Let's talk about what he did. First, administrative reforms. Yongzheng tightened the machinery of government, cutting down inefficiency and cracking hard on corruption. He wanted officials who worked for the empire, not for themselves. Under his leadership, the court introduced new systems to ensure taxes were collected fairly and consistently. He even created the palace memorial system, a direct channel through which officials could report problems straight to the emperor himself. Imagine bypassing layers of bureaucracy and sending your concerns directly to the boss. That was Yongzheng's style. He wanted information fast, accurate, and unfiltered. Second, fiscal tightening. Yongzheng was obsessed with stabilizing the empire's finances. Decades of war and expansion had drained resources, and corruption in tax collection was rampant. He introduced strict auditing and financial reforms to plug leaks in the imperial treasury. For the ordinary farmer or merchant, this sometimes meant heavier scrutiny and stricter tax enforcement, but it also meant a more stable economy overall. He wasn't afraid to be unpopular if it meant strengthening the empire's foundation. Third, consolidation of power. Yongzheng centralized authority in a way his father never fully did. He wasn't content to let factions divide the court or let powerful regional leaders operate independently. Instead, he tightened the emperor's grip on every corner of the dynasty. To some, this looked like tyranny, an emperor who ruled with an iron fist. But to others, it was necessary discipline, the medicine that kept the empire alive during turbulent times. Of course, not everyone saw him as a reformer. Critics called him a usurper. They whispered that his entire reign was built on stolen legitimacy, that the throne had been snatched through deceit and fraud. Some accused him of paranoia, pointing to the harsh punishments he imposed on rivals and the secret police system he used to monitor dissent. To these critics, Yongzheng wasn't a hero. He was a man forever haunted by the shadow of an illegitimate crown. And yet, his supporters tell a different story. They argue that Yongzheng was exactly the kind of ruler China needed at that moment. Disciplined, efficient, and unflinching. He didn't expand the empire's borders like Kangxi before him or Qianlong after him, but he strengthened the empire from within. He was the reformer who shored up the foundations so that the Qing Dynasty could continue to thrive for another century. So, who was the real Yongzheng? A usurper or a reformer? Perhaps he was both. Perhaps that is why his reign is so fascinating and so controversial. What we know for certain is this: the scandal of his succession never truly faded. Even today, historians debate whether the imperial will was genuine or altered. Was the brushstroke changed from 14 to 4? Was he chosen by his father, Or did he take power through clever manipulation? That question has become one of the most enduring mysteries of the Qing Dynasty. And maybe that's why the story continues to capture our imagination. Because it isn't just about one man becoming emperor, it's about the nature of power itself. Is power earned by merit? Is it handed down by tradition? Or is it seized by those bold or careful enough to take it? For Yongzheng, the answer didn't matter once the crown was on his head. What mattered was how he ruled. And in that, he proved himself undeniably effective. His reign may not have been the longest, but it was one of the most impactful. He took the throne under clouds of suspicion, but he left behind a dynasty stronger, leaner, and better prepared for the future. So here's the takeaway. History doesn't always remember leaders for how they came to power. It remembers them for what they did with it. And in that sense, the quiet prince who became the controversial emperor carved out a legacy far louder than anyone expected. The story of Yongzheng reminds us that the path to power is rarely clean. It is messy, contested, and full of shadows. But sometimes the ones who step through that darkness emerge as the very leaders history needed most. So, what do we make of this story? The rise of Emperor Yongzheng over the crown prince is not just a tale of one dynasty, it's a window into the volatile and unpredictable nature of imperial succession. In the Qing court, power was never guaranteed by birthright alone. It was contested, negotiated, sometimes stolen, and always shadowed by suspicion. Yongzheng's path to the throne shows us exactly that. Was it his political skill, his careful neutrality, his loyalty to his father that won him the crown? Was it Kangxi's hidden preference, a deliberate choice to reward discipline over ambition? Or was it manipulation, an altered will, a clever trick that changed the course of history with just a single brushstroke? The truth even now remains uncertain. And perhaps that's why this story fascinates us centuries later. Because it reminds us of a timeless truth. In monarchies and in politics more broadly, transitions of power are rarely clean. They are messy, contested, and often decided not only by destiny, but by the cunning and choices of individuals. But here's the undeniable part. Once Yongzheng was on the throne, he ruled. He took suspicion, scandal, and whispers of betrayal and turned them into action. He streamlined the empire's administration, stabilized its finances, and consolidated authority in ways that gave the Qing dynasty another century of strength. He may not have been beloved by all, but he proved effective. He left his mark not just on the palace walls, but on the very machinery of governance. And maybe that's the greater lesson here. History doesn't always judge leaders by how they arrive at power. Often, it remembers them for what they do with it. Whether Yongzheng was a rightful heir or a usurper, his reign stands as one of the most impactful in the dynasty's history. Think about it this way. How often do we hear debates today about legitimacy, about whether a leader truly deserves their position? Whether in governments, corporations, or communities, the question of how they got there always stirs passion. But in the long run, the real measure is often what they accomplish once they're in charge. Yongzheng's story is a perfect reflection of that, and yet the mystery still lingers. Was it 4 or 14? Was the quiet prince always destined to rise, or did fate take a detour? That unanswered question keeps his legacy alive, not just as a historical figure, but as a symbol of how fragile and how fascinating the struggle for power can be. So as we close this chapter, let's carry this thought. Power transitions are never as simple as they appear. Behind every crown, every throne, every seat of authority lies a web of intrigue, ambition, and human choice. Yongzheng's rise is just one example, but it's a reminder that history itself is often written not in certainty, but in shadows. And sometimes it is in those shadows that the most enduring legacies are born.